Good morning. Let me first find out, are there any people here this morning that were not here Monday? Got one. Now, I sent out last night a link to YouTube that's got the entire presentation from Monday. Who got that email, that link? So it went out. If you have not gotten that link to Monday's presentation and you want it, come see me afterwards. And I'll make sure we've got your email address. The other thing today is please turn off your phones. I'm pleased that Garth is with us this week, Monday and today. Best thing I can say about him is he's a good man, and I trust him with my money. Well, his wife's up there, so she's trying to stay faster than
Sure, interference, for sure.
So, ask your questions today. I believe you've got work for us today.
We'll see how it goes. We'll see.
Okay.
See what the interest is.
See what the interest is. Again, if you didn't get the link to the presentation materials from last week and a different email from Monday, not last week, and a link to the video from Monday, see me afterwards. Without further ado, Garth, take it away.
Thank you very much for coming back after Monday. And I missed, is there someone who was not here? Pamela, you were not here on Monday. Okay, well good. We're going to have a lightning review of Monday. Don't blink or you'll miss it. But for your benefit, Pamela, I give the link to this, so if you want to go back and look at it, that'll be at the end, and then in the follow-up email. So, oops, I have a clicker today. This is great. Except it just disconnected while we were sitting here. Okay, let's try this again. There we go. Sure. That wasn't a long enough test, apparently. Try this again. Work. There we go. Okay. So, if you're concerned about running out of money, or health issues, or whether you'll be able to stay in place or maintain meaningful relationships, or if you missed something in your planning, it's a piece of your puzzle, you're just not sure if you're addressing, you're in the right place, right here, right now. We also talked about that 7 habits have to do with 2 categories of relationships: people and money. People and money. Last night I sent out a link to a PDF that elaborates on the factors that go into each of these kinds of relationships. And no matter where you are in your journey, you should be able to get something out of this, not just the information, but the process. The main thing to know and to reinforce is that you're here because you had to get up out of bed, behind the wheel, not such a nice day, drive here. Action always trumps wait and see. Wait and see is not a plan. As I mentioned Monday, passivity pretends poverty, whereas action accelerates abundance. So the worst decision is no decision, because then all the default things happen. The goal with all of this is so that you can tell the people you're closest to, that you love the most, I'm going to do my part, so that no matter what happens to me, you can give me your love, at the same time keep your life. And conversely, where you're in a default position for having to step out of your normal life to help somebody else, which isn't always a bad thing, but it can, if not planned for, be overly stressful. You want to be able to say to them, I want to be able to give you my love and still keep my life, retain as much of my earning power, my aspirations, my goals as possible. So blitzing through the 7 habits, because today's implementation, Monday was what were the habits. The first one is a mindset of having realistic expectations of your future self, what you'll be capable of. The second one is because you know at some point someone else is going to step into your various roles. But you've got to have, it's better to err on the side of pessimistic expectations for those loved ones. Because what mistake would you rather make? To assume the best, to discover the worst, when you have the least amount of power to do something about it, or to assume and plan for the worst to discover the best. You also have a mindset of separating the noise, there's gobs of noise wherever we are, from objective professional advice. And that includes live attorneys, LegalZoom. All these tools online have their place, and I will summarize that when it comes to those tools and even the noise that's out there, use them to lengthen your list of questions. But none of those tools, none of that noise is specific to your situation. So we live in an age where people think the internet god knows all the answers. And so this is the adulterated version of what King Solomon said. But what he really said, his plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed. That's eternal. The 5th habit was understanding what leverage really means. Leverage is a power knowledge with regards to taxes and structuring your assets and income in a way to minimize taxes, especially knowing when you're most vulnerable to excessive taxation. It's also being able to turn pennies into dollars upon a triggering event when you need those dollars the most. Finally, well not finally, number 6. How do we do already? He's gone red. Houston, we have a problem. Check that? Test. Okay. So as much as we love our country, unfortunately, the government has gone down a path where it's becoming more aggressive. I think we can all see that. And part of it is because more people are at the well than are filling the well. So it's running dry. What does that mean for you? It means if you have retirement money that has not yet been taxed, you and me have no idea how much of that's yours. There's no way to know beyond maybe this year how much of those dollars will actually end up in your pocket. And part of the reasons is not just the trends, but you have these black swan events. We discussed Pearl Harbor on Monday, and we've all seen what's happening with the pandemic and what's happening with taxation accordingly. And finally, there's future shock. We live in a lightning-fast innovation period. It's only accelerating. Hold on, we're going to try this microphone again. Thank you, sir. Okay. Thank you, Steve. Is my roadie tech support? Okay. We've all heard about planning for the worst, hoping for the best. And there's a lot that goes into that. Part of it is the enhancements that technology brings versus the distractions. Enhancements can be to our lives, and distractions might be to those we're relying on later in life for assistance. Then there's the mega trend of longevity, which is a risk multiplier. The longer we live, the more economic cycles and crashes we're going to experience, the more inflation, the more chance for identity theft or being a victim of fraud or a scam or simply something bad happening. Life doesn't stop because we retire. Things keep going on around us and we're still subject to that. So, today is about applying the habits. Don't laugh too hard. That was a vocabulary test. If you can't describe what you're doing as a process, you do not know what you're doing. And that's what we've developed here, the Keep Your Life method. It gives you a process to follow versus a pill to swallow, with milestones along the way so you can see where you are. At the same time, most of you are either retired or getting close to that. So there's a bit of a challenge here. When we're working, we're accountable to our supervisor, to our even our coworkers. Now, once we've set that aside, if we had kids and they're out of the nest, who are we accountable to? Well, yes, to ourselves. And sometimes we need a little help with that, which is why athletes have coaches. And the easy answer, if you're married, is your spouse. But the question becomes, are we really in a mindset where we're willing to be accountable? So I bring that up because for some of us, having an accountability can be a bit of maybe a threat to our autonomy. At least that might be something we're thinking about. However, nobody can do this process, or there's different versions of this. This is my process. I'm not going to say it's God's gift to retirement plan. I'm not that arrogant. But any process requires some accountability along the way, some advice, some keeping you down that path without maybe giving up when the tough gets going. But only you have the information that can make this successful. It's not about making the process successful, it's about making sure you've done everything you can in your life to capture all the advantages, to avoid all the pitfalls, everything you can, so that when you have the least amount of power to improve your life, you've already done everything you possibly can. And then, as a steward, the rest you give to the Lord, but we have our part to do, and you want to make sure you've done it well. So we use the conventional Olympic medal levels of achievement with milestones along the way, and each one has 3 steps within it. I call them mental milestones because they do require a little bit of grit and determination to achieve. It begins with resolve. Drawing that proverbial line in the sand. All right, we're going to do this, and we're going to start right now. We're going to resolve to steward the way I just talked about. We're going to resolve to exercise the power while we have it. We're going to resolve to establish that confidence, control, and belief to the extent possible. It begins with knowing your season of life. And I'm being reminded I need to sit because of my back. So don't take that as an issue. But I call it seasons of life. And this is your starting point. Spring is the easiest. We all like spring. We know what it portends. And it just means that nobody in our immediate circle is on the verge of needing some kind of care, needing us to step out of our normal roles and to help them. So we move on to gathering all our important information into one place. Summer means a parent or parent-in-law, or maybe it's a sibling, needs that kind of help either now or will soon. In which case, you want to encourage that person to establish their legal powers to let you help them. That means see an estate planning attorney. If that person is a little bit older, having cognitive issues, an elder law attorney. Autumn just brings it closer to home. That person is a spouse or someone in the household. In winter, I think I need help. Now you might think, that's kind of dumb. How do you know when you need help? The last phone call I received from my father, and my dad was a physician, he called to tell me he had dementia. Obviously, he was in a moment of lucidity. And he said, Garth, the dementia comes and goes, but as time goes on, every time it comes, it's going to stay longer until it doesn't go away. And 4 months later, he was gone. So you can recognize when you need help. That is a possibility. So, getting organized. We all have our unique way of piles and things. And so if this is your way of being organized, God bless you, that's great. But that's not going to help the person who needs to take over your affairs. Do not leave them that. And I have a lot of tips for getting organized. So you start by getting your papers organized. If it has an account or policy number, you want to get those original documents if possible, or at least the latest statements. And ultimately, you want those in electronic format. You want them scanned or downloaded, whichever you have to do. You want them in electronic format. Why? Because the person that needs to see them is very likely in a different time zone anymore these days.
He's what?
In a different time zone.
Oh.
Far away. Not in town or even in state anymore. Maybe that person is, but for many of us, the people we count on are going to be mobile. For us, it's going to be, we have one particular child who could be anywhere around the world at any moment. So having things digitally available is critical. And with that comes the fact of life that we all see in the news, and it's a big deal here in terms of research at the lab, and that's cybersecurity. There's a lot of digital hygiene we need to learn to practice. And I have a list, and I don't pretend to be the IT person, and I recommend that one of your paid professionals at some point would be, an IT person to at least get you set up. I'll mention one thing that we never hear about. We always hear about, updates, the evil updates from Microsoft, and changing your passwords and making them robust, all that sort of thing. I never hear it, but it's super important. That is, if you have Wi-Fi at home, you have a router. The router comes with a default password, and you'd be surprised at how few people change it. Which means anybody who wants to, 10-year-old kid, could get into your system at home because they'll know the password to your router. The default username and password is super easy. By the way, even if you do change it, there's a thing called a pineapple that costs $99. Anybody with this pineapple can get into your Wi-Fi system if you're a target. So, my next door neighbor is an IT person for medical offices. He was a programmer in the Air Force. He made the point that if you're a target of hackers, there's nothing you can do. So don't make enemies. Because if you're a target, you're going to be hacked. In the meantime, don't be low-hanging fruit. That's the takeaway message. Do what you can to not be the low-hanging fruit to all the bots out there crawling around trying to get into your system or prank kids. So I mentioned the metal levels, and it starts with bronze level. Yes, sir?
Okay, you talk about things in electronic format. However, there are some things that need to be notarized, and they're difficult to do a legal electronic format, like a signed document, a notarized document. Paper copy, electronic, doesn't necessarily work. A Word document that anyone can change doesn't necessarily work. So,
Correct.
Which is going to that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I'm glad you brought that up. So the paper copies, the notarized copies, obviously you need to keep them in a secure location, and the loved ones that need to know will need those documents at the critical time. Need to know where they are. You need to be able to access them. At the same time, you might not want to necessarily just hand them over either. They can be extremely powerful. It's a discussion you have with your attorney. However, scanning those into PDF format, which is an image, is how you want to scan these, so that what's saved in the cloud, accessible to your loved one, or maybe accessible when they need it, will be typically a PDF format. For example, I've got all my notarized pages for my estate plan. They're in the binder with the printout, but it's also in the cloud, and only key people have access to the documents they need to. That's it. That can be set up relatively easily. Did that answer your question?
Not exactly. For instance, my passport. If I take a photograph of my passport, it is not sufficient to do the purposes of the passport. The title to my car is not sufficient to have a Xerox copy of it. I have to have the original. Kind of is. There's reason we have safe deposit boxes. I have DD 1040, DD something or other, that is necessary for certain purposes. And electronic copy does not always work.
True. The electronic copy is not always sufficient for effecting a transaction, but electronic copy it's a heck of a lot easier having an electronic copy to get another original if you need to. Take a birth certificate, for example. If you've got an image of a birth certificate, you know what the numbers are, all the name, rank, serial number issues are, to go through the process of getting an original if you can't access the original. For example, and since you brought up a passport, last I knew, it's illegal to make a color copy of a passport. So when we traveled the world for adopting our kids, we were instructed to make grayscale copies of our passport, keep them separate from our passport in case we were robbed. Then having that grayscale copy of our passport would help us at the embassy to get a replacement. So good points, good points. Nothing is perfect substitute for the original, but having a copy beats the heck of not having it at all. So thank you for that. And drawing the line in the sand after that is recognizing your season of life and getting organized. That's bronze. That's a big deal because the organization part can be tough. So do it in 15, 20-minute blocks per day. Put that in your calendar. Say, today I'm going to make sure I have my insurance documents for my stuff, my homeowners and my auto and my boat and my cabin, all that stuff. I'm going to have the policy and latest statements in one spot. And then tomorrow I'll do my, for me, my life insurance, my disability, that sort of thing. And then maybe my business insurance, and then maybe my investment accounts, and then maybe my bank accounts, and maybe my retirement accounts. And pull all that stuff together. Download when you can. After that is to build what I call a personal board of directors. It's your team. But from an imagery standpoint, it's kind of like if you think about your home as a corporation, you run it like a business, you would have, a mission statement and values, and you would have a board of directors that are all in alignment with that. And that board of directors is split between professionals and loved ones. Professionals consist of your accountant, could be an enrolled agent or the CPA, and your attorney, family, estate planning attorney, elder law if applicable. Then you have at least two types of powers that you want to grant to your attorney in fact or your agent. That's financial and healthcare. A quick aside is, and I call this kind of a patch, if you haven't done the powers of attorney yet, yes, see an attorney. However, every state has a template you can download. And it also includes your medical directive on it, which is if you're not expected to live at the hospital, hospitals need those. It's your way of relieving your loved ones of the decision about when they pull the plug. Yes, sir?
I understood you say that downloading stuff from the web has really big inherent problems. And here I just say, I heard you say download it from the state.
As a patch, as a first step. However, part of that patch should be sufficient from the standpoint of the medical directive, which is state-approved language for the hospital. In fact, the power of attorney document will be honored from a healthcare standpoint by the hospital and the doctors. So there is, in fact, a lot of attorneys will just use that for the healthcare one. There's always a spot in there, blank spot, where you can elaborate on criteria. For example, I might say, if after 30 days, I'm not resuscitated, pull the plug. Because I don't want my family totally stuck with these huge medical bills. Personally, I put in a shorter period of time, but I did mention this. I said, allow another 7 days for loved ones to be notified and to arrive. Because people who love me might want to hold my hand while it's still warm. Something to think about. So, yeah, in general, the internet is not the answer, but when you have a state-approved forms, that's at least a starting point for these specific situations. Not a replacement for seeing the attorney.
So if I'm going to be in California in February, should I fill one out for California and one for Idaho?
If you're just traveling, they'll honor where you're a resident. And if you move, having one from another state will typically be honored unless a lot of time and legal changes have gone by. In the absence of any, they'll typically honor the one that you have. They're just going to be glad that you have it. And by the way, that's registered with your state. Idaho's moving it from the Department of State to Health and Welfare. They haven't done that yet. But the point is, you get this, you can print out a piece of paper and cut it to fit in your wallet, and it's got a code. So if I'm in an accident and my wallet hasn't burned up in the fire, the hospital can, and I'm in life support, they can look it up And they'll know who my agents are. They'll know how to get a hold of her. They'll know how to get a hold of my son, who's the contingent. So it's important for that sort of thing.
The state of Idaho actually sends you a healthcare directive card that you can keep in your wallet. They can scan at the hospital.
How long ago did you get that?
I don't know, maybe 10 years ago.
Thank you for sharing that. Budget cuts. Because they just sent, I have my kids do this when they turn 18. Budget cuts. They don't send you the card anymore.
It's still valid, right?
Yeah. They sent me a card with a passcode on it instead of a barcode. I'm not sure why. But anyway, the point is you get something from the state that the hospitals very much need for that situation.
I didn't catch what this card is again.
That's the card that the state sends you after you have uploaded your completed forms. And oh, by the way, when I uploaded my completed forms, I included the ones that I prepared with my attorney. You don't have to upload their forms. They just want to make sure you've got that medical directive along with the powers. And then they have that in their archive that any hospital can get a hold of. Good stuff. Good stuff. So then you need your team leader. Among your professionals is your team leader, who's going to be the hub of the wheel and pull all this together. And this is the minimum. You might have other professionals. For example, if you have a trust, you might need trustees who could be one of these people here. But if it's complicated, you might have professional trustees, typically at a bank trust department. Or you might have your general practitioner. I'll ask clients who the general practitioner is. And I'll say, if I suspect there's something not right with you, I'm not qualified, but I've known you a long time, and you just seem to be having trouble. Is it okay if I just kind of, I'd let your family know first, hey, dad's having trouble, mom's having trouble. If they're not available, I want the permission to say to your doctor, maybe you want to call your client in and talk to them, maybe do an examination. I'm not qualified, but I see there's something not normal with this person. You might want to check it out as a professional. So how do you choose a financial advisor? I've got a download on a very long, detailed way to do this, but a couple of key points are the back office. The back office. Any advisor can have a license. Not all licenses are like this, but anyone could have a fiduciary license where the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, says you've got to work in your client's best interest, no matter what. And that's great. I've got a 65, that's what that does. However, the IRS tells corporations who has shareholders, their fiduciary obligation, I can't get too close to you, is to the shareholders. So you've got this built-in conflict of interest that if the person behind the desk is obligated to work in your best interest, they take all your information and then they go to their support system to figure out what are the best vehicles, and of course they work with the team. But if their back office has a different set of obligations, you have a baked-in conflict. So what can happen is if you need this tool, very specific tool for your situation, but the back office has one of these, it's kind of cool looking, but it's not going to do the job. So having a back office with deep resources that are not conflicted is a big deal. Next, you want alignment. You want this person to to have values and beliefs that are in alignment with yours and incentives that are in alignment with your success. I call this alpha advice, which is a combination of humility and deep back office resources. What comes before that, though, is the humility side. Humility is key. Humility is knowing what you don't know and being willing to go outside of your wheelhouse to get the information your client needs. Did this in engineering all the time. I was really good at certain things, but I couldn't solve all my clients' problems. I had to go get the electrical or the mechanical or the civil, different kinds of engineers to bring it to bear for that client situation. It takes humility, which is why, by the way, listening to the talking heads is only good for helping you build your list of questions. Because to be a successful talking head, there is no humility. They've got to puff themselves up, get you to believe them. So be careful of that. It's also, I call it the we is better than me mentality. So progressive simplification. I guarantee you that when my father called me to tell me he had dementia, he wasn't thinking about his portfolio. He wasn't thinking about the documents. He wasn't thinking about all that technical stuff. So here's something for you to think about. And that is, at some point, you'll be turning over that management to somebody else. We talked about this in the getting organized side. I'm going to elaborate on that a little bit. If you haven't already simplified, the person who's now stepping in to manage your affairs, who has a family, a career, aspirations, things they want to do, now they love you and they're not going to complain about stepping in, but I can pretty much guarantee they're going to do what it takes to simplify your affairs for them. If they can do that without dishonoring you and your wishes, they'll do it. Who wouldn't? Who wouldn't want to make their lives simpler when you're managing somebody else's affairs? Then there's speaking your money language. I mentioned on Monday, if you ran a business, you were used to feast and famine. But if you were a W-2 employee all your life, you were used to a paycheck. So they're totally different worlds. And you might want your advisor to speak in the world that you're used to, keeping in mind that as we get older, it's proven scientifically, I'm stepping on something, that we lose our ability to understand technical concepts, financial concepts. Another driver for that simplification. But the advisors themselves have two basic schools of thought. One is probability-based. It's all statistics. What's the probability that you're going to be able to make it for the rest of your life? You don't want to be operating where it's down here and not so good. Then there's the safety-first approach. I call it dignity-driven, which means the income you need for your basic expenses are locked in. Nobody can take them from you. They're not going to go away. You will never lose your dignity for lack of money. Because along comes, you know what these stand for? Well, you can't see that one very well. What is that?
Black swan.
Black swan. What is that symbolic of?
Yeah.
Heard of a black swan event? Okay, well, COVID was a black swan event. The housing crisis was a black swan event, although some people saw it coming. They're typically drastic downturns in markets, especially, that few, if anybody, saw it coming. There's always someone who says they saw it coming. Okay. But for the most part, no one saw it coming. They just happen. And if you're running statistics and you have the black swan, it might work, it might not. Or maybe you want that black swan to have no effect on your dignity. There's no right or wrong answer here. The key is making sure that you and your advisor are aligned. And the advisor is an advisor, not a controller. So, one of the caveats to choosing your board of directors is there's a big difference between choosing professionals and choosing loved ones. Professionals, you call them up, set an appointment, and they'll be there. And you meet with them. And for a lot of those appointments, you want key loved ones for those meetings. But the professionals are paid. You're not paying your loved ones. The loved ones can have two kinds of interest. They might be interested in what they get in the end. I hope that's not why they would show up for that meeting. Or avoided pain towards the end. Because planning well means you're going to minimize the pain. Life has pain. Life transitions have pain. That's not going to change. There's going to be, no matter how well you plan, someone you love needs help. It's never going to be easy. But you can be easier, and that's the key. So by their participating, when you want them there, or when your professional asks for them to be there, this is a litmus test. If they say, I'm too busy, my challenge to you is to say, okay, I'll find somebody else. If that doesn't get your attention, then keep your word and find your Plan B person and get that person on board. And when your first person figures out that you mean business, if they really want that role, they can pay the attorney to change it around. That'll be their skin of the game for the near term. Do not let somebody else's disinterest derail your progress. That's the key. Your life is too important to let someone's temporary, I'm too young to think about this stuff when you get old. I don't want to think about when, we can't do fun stuff together. I don't want to think about when you die, for crying out loud. Well, it's going to happen to all of us. So it's better to think about it when it's not an emergency, when we're not under duress. That's the responsible and more pleasant thing to do. If they're not interested, find somebody else. So the silver level, you've identified your professionals, of whom includes the team leader and your loved ones for your personal board of directors. Okay, so that was silver. The last step is gold. That's the realization of all of this. So we'll take a new house as a metaphor for your last stage in life. Your attorney builds the frame. And the reason for that is there are certain vehicles that need to be owned by a certain entity. It might be you, it might be a trust. And so how you structure all that, you don't want to do it twice. You want this framework built one time. And then you bounce it off your accountant, because the taxes are such a huge implication for such a long period of time, even though the attorney should be up on some of that. You bounce it off the accountant and see if there are any tax issues that make you have to go back to the attorney or get them to talk about what's optimal for your situation. So the framework, the attorney, looking at the lay of the land, especially from a tax and is it feasible standpoint, is your accountant, and then your team leader brings it all together so you've got what is uniquely yours. Yes, sir?
I would guess that 99% of individuals that need this kind of work do not have an accountant. They do their own accounting. without an accountant. Maybe they have a tax firm that does their taxes, but that's not an accountant. So if we don't have an accountant, do you think we need to get an accountant?
Yes.
To do what?
Planning, tax planning, tax planning. An accountant that's just filing your tax return is looking at last year. You're talking about strategizing for the future. And again, at some point when you're handing off the management of your affairs to somebody else, that somebody else wants to talk to somebody who knows what's going on. And that'll need to be these professionals. You're doing it for them, if not for yourself.
But I know what accounts I have, I know what money I have. What you're saying is maybe 6 weeks, 6 days, or 6 minutes from now, I won't. And somebody has to be able to step in who knows that. Is that the idea?
That's part of it, yes. Correct. That's part of the getting organized, is because none of us is guaranteed tomorrow, and we don't want to leave a mess for people who have to pick it up. And the other thing is our natural declination in life. At some point, we can't do what we were doing. We simply can't handle it anymore. We're going to need that help. And the person who hasn't had the continuity of those decades when you're doing all that accumulation, all that earning and investing and planning yourself, the person that steps into that role doesn't have that history. So having someone who's licensed to speak in that area and hopefully has known you at least long enough to understand what all your motivations were and maybe helped you with some restructuring can then work closely with that loved one stepping into that role. Okay, so goal is you've established your legal authorities. You've funded whatever vehicles it takes to build that house. And you own it. Nobody's telling you what to do. You had the dream for this dream home, and you work with the professionals to make sure that what you build will stand. That's the key. You've got to own it. Got to own it. Now, what might be, let's kind of do a quick review of life here. What might be working against us? Actually, we're at 9:50. Anybody need to take a quick break? Raise your hand if you want a quick break. Okay. So this is lightning review of life threats to our goals. So right now, we are in an inflationary period, and I think the Fed has finally realized the word transitory was a bad word, and they don't use it anymore. And we have low interest rates. This is not the 70s, where we had high inflation, we had high interest rates. This is a whole other animal. That presents its own challenges. Of course, there's health events. We mentioned that. And that can precipitate things like disability, or death, or the need for long-term care. Then there's longevity. We are living longer. That has its own challenges, such as, do we have enough money? Because we're living longer and we're ramping down, might we be more prone to scams or elder abuse? My mom was sharp as a tack. She was witty, she was brilliant. When she took her teacher's test after college, she got the highest score in the state of Pennsylvania. Super smart lady. I didn't find out until after she died that she'd been scammed out of about $8,000. And all I can surmise is that when computers were new to her in her 70s, she didn't know anything about digital hygiene. And so the short of it is, there's so much information out there, it's easy for someone to call you up and know so much about you that they've got to be real. They've got to have your best interests at heart. How could they know these details about your life? I mean, for her to have been scammed is beyond me, because I knew even until the end she was sharp, but she was still scammed. It happens. A job change while you're still working, depending how long you're out of work, can be as consequential as a market crash. And then, of course, there's market crashes too. Then we talked about estate planning, meaning evaluate your dependents. If you've got a business, you've got to look at business succession. You don't want to lose your life's work in that business. How is that going to pass on? And perhaps it was a big part of your retirement nest egg. You're counting on that business. You want to maximize its valuation. All kinds of issues. And then we talked Monday about these entitlements to be paid into all our lives. They just might not deliver their promises, not as promised, not as they were billed to us when we started paying into them 40 plus years ago. And we've got this going on. I remember listening to Senator Mike Crapo said, you know, the IRS expects corporations to follow generally accepted accounting procedures. They can be penalized. CEOs can go to jail. If they're cooking the books, they have to follow GAAP, GAAP, generally accepted accounting procedures. Well, who does not follow GAAP?
Federal government.
Federal government. Once again, those who tell us what to do differently. And the gist of what Senator Crapo said, I can't reach it. I don't know if this works or not. Put a 0 here after the 9. That's what our real debt is. When you consider all the unfunded promises, it's at least 10 times more than what they're telling us. Which inevitably leads to, and where are they going to get the money from? I have a theory. And that is, among all registered voters, which is a whole other issue now, which kind of puts a bit of a wrench in my theory, but you're wealthy if you're in the top 45% of registered voters. Because that way there's always a majority who's not paying for the rest, who will vote that way. That's my theory, for what it's worth. So this is a pretty heavy burden. There's a lot of pressure on us. And this is not scare tactics. This is just life. We can all go out and have a great day and laugh. When we went to a birthday party last night and they were doing karaoke and all this kind of stuff. But this is all still here. And you can carry it yourself, or you might want to find help with that burden. That's the key. And then how do you find the right kind of help so that you're not taken advantage of? Which is why it can't just be one person does it all. It comes back to accountability, not just for each of us in doing our plans, but in the implementation of those plans. When it comes to professionals, which is easier? Sit behind the desk, have your client come in, and ask you all kinds of questions, you give them all kinds of answers, and they feel so good, they walk away, they don't ask anybody else anything. They've listened to the professional, they got the answers to the questions, they're good. Or have some people with various points of view that with appropriate licensing behind them, that they all know what's going on, and you're bouncing these ideas off each other. You're coordinating, like the accountant and the attorney, for example, the financial advisor. And let's just face facts. Financial advising has a very low, it's like used car salesman to a lot of people, okay? This abuse is real, it's out there. And if someone's only listening to, say, the financial advisor, And this can happen in every profession with people, doctors, you name it. But if you're only listening to that one person, there's no check and balance. There's no one to say, hey, wait a minute, what is with that? Because if you're the guru and you've transferred so much confidence to your client that they don't question what you say, it's easy to get a little selfish, to maybe even get a little, push the envelope of what's ethical or even legal. It's in the news every day, it happens in every profession. So the idea was to have one person coordinate to make it easy, so you're not having all these meetings with all these people all the time where it's just not logistically possible or reasonable. Which if you vet that person out thoroughly, and then you stick with that person, but you know there's accountability built into the process, and no one's going to walk away with your money. I can't tell you how many times I've had other people come along who, typically widows, whose husband they trusted implicitly, who worked with one advisor, whom he trusted implicitly, and when that husband died, she was not in a good situation. She'd never been part of those discussions, and frankly, that advisor, even though he had all the proper designations after his name, clearly took advantage of that husband. It happens. It happens. So having the process to avoid that is what I'm trying to convey and why I wrote the book. And I wasn't here talking about buy this investment, oh, gold's coming back, oh, you should be in small cap. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the process and the people and the why, because relationships will change with time. It's inevitable, so be prepared for that. So we're at 10 o'clock. I've got like I said, at the end of Monday, I will today as well have the QR code to this presentation and a few other things for you that are all free, not selling you anything. Except I'm selling my book, I told you before. It's $10, or let me be on an occasional email list to bounce some ideas off of you for building a community, then you get it for free. But any other questions, issues I missed completely or unclear? There's a lot of topics in here. This is quite a universe of issues. And I'm not saying I know all the answers, but by all means, if you have the question, chances are someone else does too.
Question?
Yes, sir.
Would you explain what tax risks are likely out there for most people? Because with the ceiling on the estate tax is so high, most of us are not even close to having to pay an estate tax when we die. So what are the issues with taxes we need to worry about?
Legislative risk. That ceiling changes frequently. My dad died in 2010. The year before, it was like $1 million. But that had sunset, and there was no limit in 2010. George Steinbrenner's family inherited every penny. Hundreds of millions of dollars, because there was no state tax limit, exemption limit. But then it dropped back down. And then it goes up with inflation, maybe. Then last administration, it jumped up. They're already talking about dropping it back down. So it's the whims of Congress. Whatever Congress, here's the takeaway. Whatever Congress says is permanent, if they've made it permanent, they can make it unpermanent. They can change it. Yes, sir.
So it sounds like if you want to take care of your loved ones after you die, it's probably best to take care of them right now. and die with little or nothing in your estate.
That's one approach. If you can time it so that your last breath is your last penny, God bless you.
Or have a trust, is that what it's called, that will have them owning whatever, the trust owns whatever you own, and when you die, that trust automatically goes to them without intervention.
Yes and no. So, I'm not an attorney, but I can talk at this level. Whereas a will and trust, a will disperses the assets, well, once the creditors are paid, and once any taxes are paid, it disperses what's left according to the will. Boom, done. Now, if you've got a son who's a drug addict, and he inherits $100,000, what might you have done? The drug addict suddenly has 6 figures, even 5 figures, even 4 figures. You might kill him. A trust, on the other hand, can sprinkle. You have control, it can have conditions. You can put timelines on, you can say whatever you want in the trust. Try not to be overly prescriptive because we cannot predict everything that can happen in life. But if you've got someone who's a spendthrift, or you might want to say you've got to be drug-free for 3 years or alcohol-free for 5 years before you get anything out of this trust. And the trustee is the firewall. The trustee has a legal obligation to honor the wishes of that trust. And they can sprinkle, they can pay the utility bill directly, they can pay the landlord directly, they can pay the groceries even directly if they want to, anymore these days. You can do that without giving a lump sum to someone who can't handle it. That's just one tiny example of how a trust can come into play versus the will. And the trust, so like, what would the Rockefellers do? What the Rockefellers do is they take out a life insurance policy on every kid. And they say, okay, the kid can take a loan from the trust to build a business. And as their business is profitable, they pay it back. But if they die, or if the business fails, at least at the point when that child dies, the life insurance pays back the trust. So the trust is never depleted by using life insurance. There's all kinds of cool ways you can do that. Which brings up another issue to consider with regard to legislative risk. If you have an account, any kind of an account, the Treasury Department can change the rules like that. They do every year. Just, for example, contribution limits, or the age for required minimum distributions. Those are just at-will changes, right? So if you have a contract, it's really hard to change the rules on a contract that was consummated, signed, sealed, delivered, legally at a certain point in time. All they can do is change the rules for new contracts. The old contract has to be honored. If things get really tyrannical, I suppose they can do whatever blazes they want. They can point a gun at your head and say, screw the contract. But in a civilized society, contract law, there's a grandfathering involved, which is why you can reduce and avoid legislative risk by having some of your assets or assets plans inside of contracts. And insurance is a contract. Yes?
What happens if you have insurance and the insurance company goes bankrupt?
What happens if you have insurance and the insurance company goes bankrupt? A couple things. Number one, get your insurance from an A-rated company. Number two, every insurance premium includes a tax to your state that pays into a guarantee association run by the state to cover a certain level, a lower level of claims by any bankrupt company. Now, if you have $1 million policy, you might only get $300,000. But that's why you want to work with companies that are A-rated, and those ratings can change. I prefer companies that are over 100 years old, for the most part. They've been through world wars, depressions, all that sort of thing. By the way, when AIG went under, back in 2008, that was their real estate department, shall we say. Their life insurance department had no trouble at all. That part of AIG didn't suffer at all. It was totally sound.
What are your thoughts on long-term care?
Long-term care.
Insurance.
Long-term care insurance has a bad history because it's so young.
It's expensive.
However, there's been a lot of innovation and a lot of lessons learned. They're learning quicker because of computerization and that sort of thing. But to review, when it looked like the baby boomers were going to need care, the greatest generation was going to need care, living longer than expected, and their kids were busy doing other things, it birthed the need for long-term care, in short. And so the actuaries, they're the people that hide in the basement in cubicles with big computers. They had to figure out, what are the costs going to be? They had no history to base those costs on. It was totally speculation. It's kind of like all the professors and the government brainiacs that were predicting we were going to run out of oil and had no clue how wrong they were. So, long-term care was like a volcanic eruption in geologic time when it comes to insurance. But they learned a lot, and some of the innovations include tying long-term care to a different chassis, a different construct, like an annuity or a life insurance policy. And by doing that, you can guarantee that your premiums will never change. If you stick with a traditional long-term care, which is use it or lose it, like your auto insurance, you want an A-rated company, and understand that if you're paying every year as you go, that yes, there's a chance that the premiums will go up, but they will never go up just for you. Every state department of insurance has to approve any rate increase. First of all, they have to approve of a product before it's sold in their state. Second of all, they have to see the numbers for their claims and their expenses to let the insurance company raise any kind of a rate, and it can only be raised for a class of policyholders. That means for a certain rating class, like standard or certain table rating or tobacco rating, something like that. So a certain class, they can't just pick out, they can't cherry pick people to do that with. And there can be no compensation or profit involved in those rate increases. They are pure cost. Every state's Department of Insurance wants its insurance policies sold in its state to be able to pay out. That's why they're there. They are there to protect consumers. They want the insurance to be able to pay out when it's called upon, when that trigger is pulled. But they also understand that, especially in the case of long-term care, it's new and we're learning a lot. So a lot of people say, shoot, I want my long-term care benefit to be in a vehicle that no matter what happens, somebody I love gets the money. Either I get it while I need long-term care, or my loved one gets it when I die. That exists. And the premiums in that case won't change. Any other questions?
Is it worth pointing out dead man switch?
We're talking about voting?
No. No, to pass on your passports.
A dead man switch to pass. Why don't you explain that, Steve? To pass on your passwords. I know what I'm going to do for the person who's going to get my key to my password manager. Here, Steve.
Who's got a lot of passwords? Who's got a lot of passwords? How many of your loved ones, whoever is your financial and medical power of attorney, how many of those passwords do they need if you become incapacitated or you die? Well, I keep those in an Excel file. It's password protected. So how do I get that password to, all the passwords to my son and my daughter? Well, there's something you can go out and find on the internet called Dead Man Switch. If it doesn't hear from me in the number of days that I set, in my case 3 days, it'll remind me. If it hasn't heard from me, again, I set the number of days. In my case, it's a week. If it hasn't heard from me in a week, it sends an email to my son and daughter saying, check on me. And after another week, if it still hasn't heard, it sends a final message to my son and daughter, telling them that I love them, and here's the password. All those things you can control. But it's a way I've ensured that information that they will need someday can get to them when, not if, when something happens to me. Dead man switch. I'm sure there's more than one outfit. Garth does things a little differently. Look into it.
The innovations are there to meet our style. An associate of mine, she also endorsed my book. She runs what's called the Lifelong Learning and Aging Resource Network out of Boise. And she spent 25 years as a caregiver while she was an executive at HP. Because of all the hard lessons she learned over those decades of caregiving, she developed My Care Companion, My Data Diary. She runs My Care Companion, which is a support, but she developed My Data Diary, which is an encrypted thumb drive. And on that thumb drive is everything, whatever you put on there, everything you possibly need, even a picture of your pet. So if someone unfamiliar has to go in your house and take care of your pet, they know Fifi. Oh, that's Fifi, and that's Axel over there. So, it's all there. It's brilliant. It's a brilliant tool. Every tool has its pros and cons. So, my son knows where to find the key to my password manager. He doesn't carry it on him, but he knows where to get it. And when that way I can change it without having to tell him. So there's ways to do this. But remember, what we put out there on like social media, this is probably more for our younger loved ones, where there seems to be very little inhibition about broadcasting stuff. Oh, by the way, if you've got someone who's 20-some years old and, showing pictures of them, talking about their health problems, then they apply for life or disability insurance. Gee, what do you think the underwriting process just might do? It's like, come on. If you're willing to advertise it, the people who are going to evaluate the situation are going to look at that stuff. Never mind employers. Every human resource department under the sun is going to Google a candidate before they invest in an interview. They'll never, ever tell you they did it, but they're going to do it. You know where all that goes. But we have to be careful about what we put out there. It shouldn't be easy for the hackers to find your mother's maiden name and your high school mascot. These aren't deep, dark secrets, but remember, don't be low-hanging fruit. That's the key. Why set ourselves up for that? So, any other questions? Okay, great. So, like before, let's do these. Keys to the Keep Your Life Kingdom. I sent this out last night. You should already have it. It's just more details about those metal levels. Paperbacks down here. It's $10. It's $25 on Amazon. Or if you're willing to let me contact you and request feedback every now and then on a membership I'll be building to help people with this process, to share ideas, to learn from the various kinds of experts out there. It's kind of like an online fence for learning in a lot of ways. That's when I'll be soliciting feedback from you who sign up, and I'll just give you the book for that. And I'll give you the link to all the downloads that go with the book. The book covers things at a high level. It's designed to be read on a single flight. If you took a plane from here to LA, you could finish the book. Maybe no one's flying anymore. But because of that, it's story-based, and I cover things at a high level. The details are in the downloads. And finally, I'll give you a link to Tom Hegna, Retire Happy You. He was the host of PBS special, Don't Worry, Retire Happy. He is the master at using plain language to discuss planning for retirement with the various vehicles involved. Short little 3 to 4 minute series of videos, and that's free. He doesn't sell anything. He doesn't have he makes money off people like me. He's not selling to you, and through him, I'm not selling to you either. And then here is today's presentation link if you want it right here, right now on your phone. Yes, this is my wife Karen, if you weren't here before. Talking to the mic.
All right. Well, I wanted to share a personal story. When Garth's mother's passed, and I don't think it's been
Okay.
I got a little voice.
Give her the mic, please.
Is it on? Yes. I want to share, he's mentioned that, about his father and his mother's passing. In his mother's passing, let's just say there was some stuff going on among the family. And my parents, we went back to Pennsylvania where my parents are, and they got to observe all the stuff going on with his, what?
Drama.
Yeah, with his mother's passing and then going through her house. And that was the day I determined I do not want to have my kids, who are now young adults, face that. I want to get, like, Garth, we got to make sure we are in order. And I was talking to the right person. But it also did something with my parents who watched it all. And they said, we don't want to have anything like this happen to you kids. And that includes caring for them. They wanted to be able to keep their life, us keep their life, and that we would still have the the daughter-son, father-parent relationship and not have to care for them. I went back to Pennsylvania about a year or so later after his mother's passing, and my parents had cleaned house, they had organized all their files, they had the right team in place, including my brother, to have all their affairs in order. And that was really a moment of peace for me to know my parents had did that. They even took us to a storage room they had created with all of their most important stuff. And they put lawn chairs in front of the storage room, and they got me and my brother there, and they watched. And they said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I don't care if he gets it all." And they shut the door, and they had that peace. So I'm saying all this because having watched, elder parents, it was such a peace for me to know that there was planning, that I, being across the country, wouldn't have to try to go back and figure out how to take care of them. And so we've done that for our own kids. So for your loved ones' sake, I'm just going to wrap up how really important taking that first step is, as hard as it is. It brings a lot of peace to your loved ones.
Thank you, honey. Thank you very much. Okay. Steve?
What's that?
You going to wrap up?
Hey, well, yeah, you got it.
Well,
Anything you want to say?
I'll be over here. Questions, or if you want a book or not. Oh, by the way, did you ask about these people here?
Oh, yeah.
So Ron Bone was here on Monday. He's not here, Ron Bone? You got your DVD, right? And Donna Denning, Jeffrey Duplessis, Kathy Duplessis?
I'm Jeff's wife, but we already got one. We need to-
Okay, and Deanna Everett? Let's make sure I've given away what I promised to give away. Let's see, Beverly Thomas?
Yes, I got one.
You got one? Okay, wonderful. Okay. Just so you know, for those who got the DVD, it's unsealed because I'm asking you to share it. This is like an old library card for you to share it. So it doesn't just sit on your shelf after you've watched it. But if you think it's worth sharing, that's how you can give it to your neighbors and know where you gave it and get it back. Okay.
Have a good day. Stay warm.